In the last video, we looked at the percentage increase for the DPP and compared the percentage decrease in the KMT and found it to be unreasonable in most districts in Kaohsiung. Now I'd like to look at where the so-called increase in TsaiIng-Wen or DPP ballots are supposedly coming from and how the people in Kaohsiung explain the increase from 742,000 to 1.097 million. If we assume no election fraud, a general interpretation of the Kaohsiung voting electorate would be, number one, a massive loss of 281,649 ballots for HanKuo-Yu, 2, a massive gain of 281,649 ballots for TsaiIng-Wen of the DPP, plus 73,733 new voters. And number 3, this is a huge negative correlation between the two sides. It's obviously a gain for the DPP and a decrease for the KMT. So the so-called negative correlation in Kaohsiung is typically for some of the following reasons. I voted for HanKuo-Yu in 2018, but I switched to Tsai, DPP, after I saw how badly he did as mayor. I know many people who feel the same way. Number 2, my whole family voted for HanKuo-Yu in 2018, but we all switched our support to TsaiIng-Wen after we saw how he really was. Number 3, after what happened in Hong Kong in 2019, I don't want the same thing to happen to Taiwan. Number 4, Tsai was not a good president, but Han would be even worse because of his close relationship to China. He was going to sell us out. We would lose our freedom and democracy. Before the June 6 recall, I spent about 10 days in Kaohsiung, and I had already looked at the relative support rate in the city. A relative support rate is the 2020 support of a party divided by the 2018 support for that party. A dot in one of these graphs represents the relative support rate of an area in a city. If we look at the graph on the right-hand side, on the x-axis we have the KMT relative support rate. On the y-axis we have the DPP relative support rate. We can see here that the dots are going in a negative correlation. This is what I call normal voting. However, when we see a positive correlation trend of the relative support rate between the two sides, we know that it is election fraud. So in normal voting, we can see here when the KMT relative support rate is higher, the DPP relative support rate is lower. Also, when the KMT relative support rate is lower, the DPP relative support rate is higher in those areas. In a positive correlation, the lower the KMT relative support rate is, the lower the DPP relative support rate is. And when the KMT relative support rate is higher, the DPP relative support rate is higher. This is definitely not normal voting behavior and is a result of election fraud. Some basic points regarding correlation. An increase or decrease in turnout rate does not impact correlation. In normal voting, correlation should be negative regardless of which side wins. A positive correlation is achieved only through ballot stuffing without enough ballot theft, or ballot theft without enough stuffing. So once again, this is the review of Dr. Ma's initial statistical analysis showing the positive correlation. This was done by Dr. Samson Liu of Courant Institute. So on the bottom right hand side, we see a graph of New Taipei City, Taoyuan, Taichung, Tainan, and Kaohsiung. These 5 major cities have been combined into one graph, and we can see that there's a strong positive correlation. Here are the graphs of the 5 major cities. We can see Kaohsiung on the far right hand side has a fairly strong positive correlation. We can also see that the main group of dots is to the far left of 1, which means that there was a great deal of ballot theft against HanKuo-Yu. So in his conclusion, he concluded that the graphs as derived from the data from the Central Election Commission are correct. He concluded that a negative correlation between the two parties is in fact normal. He also concluded that there is a strong positive correlation between 2018 and 2020, and that there is also no counter-argument to the accusation that widespread election fraud created this positive correlation. So the Central Election Commission would have us believe that all 742,239 Tenchi-Mai voters in 2018, plus 355,382 former HanKuo-Yu voters and new voters, all voted for TsaiIng-Wen for a total of 1,097,621 ballots on January 11th. If we are to believe the 1,097,621 ballots for TsaiIng-Wen, about 32.38% of those voters should be former HanKuo-Yu voters plus new voters. Also, 67.62% of those voters should be former TsaiIng-Wen voters in 2018. However, for those 10 days when I was in Kaohsiung, almost everybody that I ran into, taxi drivers or people working in the service industries, would always say that they voted for HanKuo-Yu in 2018, but then saw what a monster he was and switched their ballots over to TsaiIng-Wen. So for the first 2 days I was hearing this, I just simply believed it. Perhaps it was true. Many people voted for HanKuo-Yu in 2018 and then switched their support back to the DPP in 2020 because of these kinds of factors listed here. However, after several days of hearing the same thing over and over again, and especially after hearing people volunteer their information about who they voted for in 2018 and in 2020, I realized what was going on. First of all, there was hardly anybody saying that they voted for TsaiIng-Wen in 2018, yet we just saw that about 2/3 of Taiwan voters should have in fact been TsaiIng-Wen voters in 2018. However, they all said they voted for HanKuo-Yu. If the 1,097,621 voters for Taiwan on January 11th are really real, then only about 1/3 of those people should have been former HanKuo-Yu voters or new voters. However, they were making it sound like everybody switched their ballots from HanKuo-Yu to TsaiIng-Wen in order to justify the large increase in TsaiIng-Wen ballots and decrease in HanKuo-Yu ballots. However, once you see this exaggerated in person in Kaohsiung for several days in a row with people from all walks of life, you realize that they are basically just giving you a story. They couldn't all be HanKuo-Yu voters in 2018 and then TsaiIng-Wen voters in 2020. Otherwise, who voted for TsaiIng-Wen in 2018? Where are those people? In my opinion, taxi drivers were the most obvious group of people that were told to say these kinds of things because they pick up people from public transportation like high-speed railway, and they run into people living in other cities and counties around Taiwan, and they're just telling them the same story over and over again because they know that taxi drivers run into a lot of people. So what I'm saying is that they forgot to tell people to say that they also voted for TsaiIng-Wen in 2018 and then voted for TsaiIng-Wen in 2020. However, that doesn't make for a good story. But we can see here that if the numbers are real, they should have had about 2/3 of the taxi drivers say they voted for TsaiIng-Wen and 1/3 vote for HanKuo-Yu. Instead, it was like everybody voted for HanKuo-Yu and then voted for TsaiIng-Wen. This is a major screw up. It would only be noticed by someone staying in Kaohsiung for a longer period of time. If you're just there for a day or two, you might get duped by this. Also on the internet, they send out people to say these kinds of things too, to manipulate people who are looking at Taiwan from the outside. So once again, when you see these things being written on the internet and being said by people that are so-called experts about Taiwan, that these things are designed to make people think that people switched their vote from HanKuo-Yu to TsaiIng-Wen between 2018 and 2020. It's all engineered to make people think that the huge change in voting behavior from the KMT back to the DPP was in fact due to these factors. However, in actuality, as we can see from these graphs, that it was just due to election fraud. The effort to cover up the election fraud continued after the election by telling these kinds of lies that everyone was thinking like this. So I can't tell you who's telling the truth and who's lying. However, I can show you that statistically speaking, at least 2/3 of Taiwan's voters on January 11th should have been TsaiIng-Wen voters and not HanKuo-Yu voters. However, they'll have you believe that almost everybody voted for HanKuo-Yu and then switched over to TsaiIng-Wen. That's their story.